What I'd like to do now is invite up the panelists for our very last session. It's an informal session, and we're going to be talking about projects in the past, present, and going forward, so you can get a sense of the diversity of projects that are happening within the communities, with the communities, from the different angles, and see how very important this topic is, but how the different ways that people are in approaching it. So if I could please ask Sunshine Best to come up here, Matthew Bethel to join us, Dorothy and Emily, Elisabeth and Andrew, and Amy Lesson, please. Thank you. Anywhere you want. So as you see, we have 3 mics, so we're gonna be sharing the talking stick, and I will stay up here, so that actually allows us to have 4 mics with that. So what we wanted to do with this last session as we close out today's symposium, as I've just mentioned, is talk about all the different projects from a science point of view, from ethnobotany, from a historian, from all kinds of different manners of what is happening. And in this particular case, I think all of us are focused on the coast, except for the language program, which is another vital element that we've been touching upon during the day. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, one of the wonderful things that Tulane instituted is the mandatory service learning classes. And with that, I develop different projects with the tribe every single time I teach it. I am a glutton for punishment because I don't do the same project. And every time we sit, we meet, and we discuss, okay, what can work with the tribe. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about 2 of them to give you an idea of the diversity, but also what students are capable of. If you know, teaching is a great joy, and it's a great joy because you interact with these students and you get a new batch every single time you teach. So, you know, it never gets old. One example that I wanted to bring up is in the spring of 2010, we had decided, Ponishin had decided that we needed to capture the recipes of the elders, that the men and women who were growing up, like Donald, in houses that had wood-burning stoves and simple stoves in palmetto houses, is an entirely different type of cooking than when you have refrigerator and gas stoves and things like that. And so the students started to capture these different recipes. My favorite recipe is actually from Donald's mother, and Donald is one of 16 children. Donald, is that correct? 16? 15, sorry, 15, only 15 children. One of 15 children, and his mother gave a recipe for sugar cookies, simple recipe, except that it meant for 5 pounds of sugar, you know, 5 pounds of flour. And I went, who has recipes like this? And when I asked her about that, she said, well, when you're making cookies for 15 children, you need a lot of cookies. I went, true. He said, also kept them busy all day long making these cookies. So imagine making them by hand and then cooking them in a wood-burning stove, and then they're coming out. And of course, Donald's cousins were all nearby, so it wasn't just 15 kids, but 30, 45. And all of a sudden I started thinking, okay, 5 pounds of sugar might not be enough. But it was that kind of perspective. We captured all of these different recipes, and then in the end of April of 2010, the BP oil spill happened. And I was due to teach the course again in the fall, and I went to the tribe and I said, do you want to do this? There's too much going on. And they said, no, absolutely. And so the project we did in the fall was we took all of those same recipes, which, besides the cookie story, was comprised largely of shrimp and crab, a lot of crab and a lot of shrimp. And they took those recipes, and the students did a whole breakdown, and they did a breakdown on the cost of those recipes. They did the breakdown on the pre-BP oil spill cost, and then what it would cost if they had to buy the shrimp or buy the crab at the local Rouse's, not at Whole Foods, not anywhere else, but at the local grocery store. And the price went up astronomically. Dishes that would normally cost $3 were now costing $40. And when you saw this pre and post spill, it gave you an idea of how traumatic on a very real, everyday, every meal level that this BP oil spill was. And so these were different activities that, didn't plan on this, but that the students and working with the tribe put together were able to give, really kind of document this phase in their life in a very different way. Recently, in this last year, another project that we did is the students created curriculums for 8th grade, things that can actually be used following all of the specific curriculums to take and to teach Native American history in colonial Louisiana, using documents, using the translated letters from the Spanish period, using these other ones. They worked on trade goods, they worked on map. They created 10 different curriculums, and then they presented them at Vermilionville, and we had them on hand, and they were passed out. Teachers from around the state were taking them, and so this was our way of how can we put the Indigenous voice into the classroom. And this came from the students. I kind of gave them things, but the students themselves picked and choose what they wanted to do. So those are kinds of projects that I work on in over the last 10, 13 years that we've done, but they come from a lot of different points of view. What I want to do now is switch the focus, and I think, I'm trying to think how we should do this. We'll do this in the order. Matthew, excellent. Oh, we're actually sitting. Okay, there we go. So Matthew, why don't we, if you can just pick up the microphone. And did you have some slides that you needed to show?
But we could, but we don't have to.
Okay.
I can just talk. Well, thank you, Laura, and thanks to the conference organizers for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here among you, and I'm originally from Tennessee. I moved down here to Louisiana about 15 years ago now, and when I moved down, I was getting a PhD at the University of New Orleans, and my academic background is in geography, so mapping. So that's what I like to do. I like to map things. And, in my courses at University of New Orleans, I got the opportunity to take some interdisciplinary courses and partner with social scientists who taught those courses. And through that opportunity, I got to meet an indigenous community, Grand Bayou Village in Lower Plaquemines Parish, in a student field trip. And on that field trip, my first time ever being here in Louisiana I got the privilege of going down the bayou on a shrimp captain's boat with the class. And when I got the opportunity to talk to the shrimp captain, I was just struck by all of the knowledge that he had of the surrounding ecosystem. I learned a lot about the land loss that you've heard Patty and other speakers here today talk about, the big issues that we're dealing with here in coastal Louisiana. And I wanted to help and bring my expertise in mapping to help these issues and to help the people that I was hearing from. I gained a great, and since then, so that's kind of how I got introduced to working with indigenous and non-indigenous communities here in coastal Louisiana on the work that I partner with social scientists and the community collaborators. And we work to learn about the traditional ecological knowledge of these communities, because the changes you've heard before, the changes in the environment here in coastal Louisiana are happening so rapidly at such an accelerated rate now, the land is being lost, that the state is trying to implement its coastal master plan to restore areas, but frankly, we don't have the resources or money to restore everything or protect everything. So we have to establish priorities. And what's the best way to establish priorities for restoration projects than learning from the local people who live on and depend on those environments that are changing and going away. Learn from them, share our expertise as scientists to help address the problem, as Chief Thomas Dardar said up here just a minute ago, help them address the problems there in their communities before we lose all of that land and then they have to resettle more and more. And before I go on, in the spirit of this, I don't speak French much, but in the spirit of this meeting, I'm going to try that. Je suis très honoré d'ici aujourd'hui, mais je parle français à peu le français, très à peu. So that's my attempt, and I think Patty and Mr. Reese is going to rib me about it later, and I didn't even read my notes on that, Mr. Reese. So anyway, being a scientist and being able to participate in this research that I'm doing in partnership with communities like Pointe-aux-Chenes, like the United Homa Nation, like the Grand Bayou Village that I just mentioned, is a real honor for me. I've learned so much, and I try to pass on some of my knowledge. And since moving on from UNO, I now work at Louisiana Sea Grant, which is at LSU, but we have offices across coastal Louisiana. And in my capacity there, I'm a research director, I'm an administrator, but I still have a research component, so I'm still able to work with the communities that I just mentioned and others in that research. And part of what we do at Louisiana Sea Grant is extension, outreach, research, and we actively try, and we have programs developed where we are engaging new faculty members across Louisiana with our extension community who are down in these communities that are very vulnerable, so that those new faculty who may have come from California or other places in the world who are not familiar with Louisiana's issues can go down to the communities, learn from them about the real issues that we're facing here, and then bring their expertise to those communities to help address this land loss and other issues that they're facing.
Yeah, and what I'm going to do is, because we actually pulled up the slide, so if I can ask you and Sunshine to come this way a little bit, and Elisabeth, I don't want to make sure that you don't get blinded by the light, so to
sure.
speak, just for a second here.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for
Because
that.
I think these images are so powerful. So I think at this point, everybody is familiar with seeing the bottom of Louisiana and the land loss here. Can I go to the next one, Matt?
Sure. Yeah, that's just an overview of the land loss mapped from, I think, the 1930s through present day. And the oranges, the more orange areas are the more recent land loss. The yellow areas are the older land loss back in the 30s. And that's just kind of an overview to give you an idea of the hot spots of land loss across southeast Louisiana, which everything you see there in orange or yellow is now, once was land, is now open water. And so the issue is pretty apparent. And then I've worked with communities, in several of these hot spots, and I think the next slide shows a zoom in on one of those areas, which I mentioned there, the Grand Bayou and Lower Plaquemines in red. And then when you zoom in, what we did is we went in and, this is just an example of one study that I was referring to in combining my expertise with the traditional ecological knowledge of the locals. For this particular study, we mapped in detail the land loss from 1968 to 2009, and you could see everything in red there was land in 1968 and is now open water present day, and that was in 2009, so it's probably already lost more than that. The Grand Bayou Village is there in the bottom right corner. I've highlighted it there, and what we did in this particular study is map the land loss, the historical land loss over time, and then developed a trend, so then we can predict with some accuracy what land is likely to be lost in the future based on those historical trends. And then going out with the locals, they would take us out in boats. Their homes are in the bayou there. You can't reach them by car. You can't drive there. They come and pick you up in their boats at the dock and then take you to their village, their home, which is in the marsh, very vulnerable area. And, this is their livelihood base, basically, where they make their living off the land, intricately tied to the water. I mean, the land and the water here. And they took us around and we listened. They said, well, where do you want us to take you at first? And we said, no, it's where do you want to show us? What's most important to you from your perspective on sustaining your community in this area? And so we went out with several people from the community who we refer to as TEK experts, because they were the most respected in their community for that ecological knowledge. And they would take us and show us places that were most important from their perspective to the community sustainability. And then we would map those areas and intersect those with our land loss maps so that restoration and protection project planners could quickly assess, okay, where are the next likely places that we're going to lose, and how important are those places to the community for its sustainability? So then that helps in project prioritization and planning, because like I said at the beginning, you can't fix everything, but we can help prioritize where we put our resources and money for the betterment of the community, and with the community's meaningful input included.
Thank you very much. And this really speaks to what we said earlier, that need for collaboration and how times have changed, that rather than being a top-down, but you have organizations reaching out and listening to the community and making plans based on that knowledge. We're going to move on next to Emily and to Dorothy. They're going to talk about future plans, ideas that they have that they'd like to do and speak further about.
All right, thank you. So my name is Emily Farr. I'm a new professor here. I moved down here from Michigan originally, moved here a year and a half ago, and I'm a professor in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. So I'm a plant ecologist, and a lot of my research centers around understanding how global change, climate change, things like sea level rise and saltwater intrusion, things we've been talking about, how that influences ecological communities. And one of the courses that I'm teaching currently is called Field Botany, and it's a course where, you can switch to the next slide. Okay. Yeah. And this is some pictures from my field botany course that I taught last year. Basically, the students and I go out every week to different sites around southeastern Louisiana, and we learn about the plants. So you can see us, we've visited brackish marshes, we've visited bottomland hardwood forests, pine flatwoods, any ecosystem pretty much within an hour drive of here. And we learn the plants, but we also learn about the ecosystem itself, the interactions, the ecology, and the conservation issues facing these systems today. And this is a course that I'm really interested in talking with you more about, how I could develop some service learning components to it, or just some collaborative projects where my students could collaborate with tribal members and potentially do projects when I teach this next year and in the future. And so some ideas that I have, if you go to the next slide, of things that my students have even brought up are things that they're interested in working with tribal members, possibly a restoration project. A lot of my students are interested in conservation and restoration, and I think giving them some on-the-ground experience and implementing a restoration project, doing some planting, choosing different species, and then monitoring them over time might be useful to do in some tribal areas that maybe have been denuded or influenced by saltwater intrusion. The other project that's been in the back of my mind that I'd like to develop and talk to more people about is a botanical project. So as part of my course, my students need to collect plant specimens and bring them into the lab and identify them and create these herbarium specimens where they press the plant and put it out on a nice sheet and label it with its scientific name and where they found it. And I think it would be an interesting collaboration to work with tribal members to make some collections of plants that are useful to the tribe, not only identify it based on its scientific name, but also its name in French, its name in the tribal languages, and talk to elders about what the botanical uses are or were for these plants. And so those are kind of my two projects I'm thinking about for the future, and if anyone wants to talk to me more, I'll be around afterwards. So thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dorothy Cheruyat. I just moved to Tulane in August. I moved from Columbus, Georgia, but I'm actually from the Kalenjin tribe in Kenya. And so talking about tribes, talking about what does language mean, what do plants mean, has been something that I grew up with. I grew up looking at what my grandmothers and my mother and the women in my village would do with plants when they collect plants. What are the names that they have? So what I want to do in the future, actually, so I teach, my area is plant and animal interactions. And so in this case, I teach a plant that's called Plants and Human Affairs. And it's really looking at how plants have influenced communities, nations, and how communities have come together through plants. And so what I want to develop in my service learning for this class is for students to listen and hear the stories that are told, to learn about plants through stories that are told by the tribal people, and to learn about them. Also to help preserve some of the plants that are very important to the tribe by working with Emily and bringing the specimens, being able to identify them, so that that information can be passed on to the future generations. It can be shared across the world. And also for me, I would be interested in connecting some of the plants or the plants that are important to the tribe here and what is important to my tribe in Kenya. Because those plants we think that are unique to our tribe may actually have some connection, and there's so much connection that can bring even people from across the oceans together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is, I know, it's exciting. I get excited about this. My little, academic heart beats fast. So we've already heard several times mentioned traditional ecological knowledge, TAK. I was about to say, never mind. It's been a long day. And so that leads us to our next speaker, and that is Sunshine Best, who has developed an app, is in the process, and some really exciting things to talk about. And we're going to switch to, you have a slide.
Should I get up over there?
No, go ahead.
All right, so yes, my name is really Sunshine Best. I did not name myself. I've seen people looking at my name tag and wondering, so I'll clarify that. I am excited and honored to be here, especially with the people who've presented before me and all that you that are here listening to us. I'm so honored. I'm also excited to introduce this project that's been my life mission for the last nearly 10 years. Like some members on our panel, I'm actually from Barbados. I'm not from here originally, and I grew up in Toronto. I moved there when I was about 10. So what led me to my particular project, opposed to the academic perspective that most people came from, I came from a personal perspective like Dorothy. So in Barbados, I remember distinctly having an experience, and it's happened many times over, but one particular time where I was very, very ill as a child, and I went to several doctors, and my grandmother was taking care of me, and over months I was deteriorating and all the medication wasn't working. So my grandmother decided that she was going to take me to what she knew. So she got herbs from her backyard and stuff in the field, and she took me to the ocean. And she washed me in the ocean, and she came back and she made compresses and teas and some other things I had to drink. And I just remember going to sleep and waking up, and the fever broke after weeks and weeks and weeks of feeling like close to death. This is the experience that I have with plants, and it's a part of not just me, but my culture. So looking at how, we can skip next. So looking at how plants not just influence human health and clothing and all aspects of humanity, health and wellness is my focus. And I wanted to make sure that there was a way that I could not just preserve traditional plant knowledge, but use that as a means of education. So being that this is something of value globally, and the World Health Organization says that 40% of pharmaceuticals used in North America come from plants. Some sources say the number is higher. That being the case, We know that white willow bark is an example of an indigenous population here that used that, then became aspirin. We know that things like ginger has helped with anti-nausea and anti-inflammatory. We also know things like aloe are good for the topical or epidural. So I wanted to figure out a way to add to this and build on it. So I decided to travel around the world when I finished school in Chicago studying sustainable urban agriculture. And I used an organization called WOOF. So I self-funded this trip. I sold everything, and I had a previous degree. My first degree actually in Toronto is culinary arts, and my second degree is sustainable agriculture. So I decided to travel. This is a part of my thesis in Chicago, is to collect traditional plant knowledge and put it in one place so that past generations can use their knowledge to help solve contemporary and contribute to contemporary issues. So whether that be things like food deserts or people not being able to afford to get access to medication. This is, I have traveled to several places, to different growing sites through WOOF. WOOF is Worldwide Organization of Organic Farmers, and it's an organization started in '71 where if you sign up and get access to the list, it's a one-year membership, you can contact the farmers, small-scale family farmers who need help working their farm, but they don't have money to pay you. So it's completely based on barter. So it'll be either 4 to 6 hours a day working or 6 to 8 hours a day working. I was able to get to either 1 to 2 meals a day and a safe, warm place to sleep. So I did this for 2 years, 3 months. Over different countries, primarily around the African diaspora and where indigenous populations, and both of them were affected by colonization. And this was my particular focus because there's such a huge overlap between indigenous populations and the African diaspora that I think that the knowledge both deserves to be preserved and is still valid now. So we can skip to the next, please. So I conducted interviews with tradition bearers, which is who I hope to connect with here today. Researchers, I wanted to collect stories that were passed down. I wanted to learn information through surveys as well, whether that, no matter what country I was in, and use this information to see if I can help solve problems locally and globally and see how those two problems overlap, like hyper-local issues as well as global issues. Next, please. So not to being one to just base my knowledge on other people's experience, I wanted to have my own experience, hence not just travel, but I actually wanted to use my education and my cultural history to grow the plants myself. So my landlord's chagrin, I grew 36 plants out of containers in my backyard, and I kept a note of every single detail from pictures, this is a database I created, common names, scientific names, where in the world the plant was originated based on my research, if it was grown from seed or from a clone or from a stick, based on the sow date, everything that I can think of that I had learned from my trip around the world and what I've learned about how indigenous populations and the African diaspora grow plants, I recorded it and kept notes of it just to see how consistent I could be and teach other people this information. So this all came to be, to land into one project that I decided to call Amnaya. So Amnaya is a name that I chose because it comes from the Sanskrit, and it means instruction on past and present usage, which I thought was absolutely perfect for what I'm trying to do. So instruction on past and present usage, another name, if you know anyone who happens to speak Sanskrit or Hindi, it also means traditional knowledge or sacred knowledge. So the goal is to take this content that I've collected and put it into 3 different areas. So the first is how to grow plants without chemicals. This is how we're gonna preserve it for going forward. How to use it in different recipes. Now recipes is not just food recipes or beverage recipes, but also in terms of making houses. Like when I was traveling, I made cob houses out of clay and river sand and river grass. So I've learned how to make ovens. Somebody was talking about clay ovens earlier. We learned how to make stoves and ovens. So there's many different reasons that plants are used. And then of course, how they can benefit public health. Now that's a twofold A and B on that module, which we can click to the next one, please. That third category is based on both traditional folk usage of those plants combined with evidence-based scientific studies. So one of my grievances in my whole, that helped me come up with this project was that I was trying to set up community gardens in Chicago, and I wanted the garden to reflect the community, hence why it's called a community garden. However, what I found is that a lot of the plants that were grown in these gardens were things that the colonists liked. So what about the people who were there first? What were they eating? What would they still use? What would they like to have access to? What about the migrants who moved to these places or the refugees that moved to these places? Are there foods that they can grow that could be beneficial and that can continue that knowledge and stop generations from deteriorating over time. This knowledge is useful. So what I decided to do is put these 3 modules together in an app, and I decided to make it into an app opposed to an online resource, because not everyone in the world has access to the internet. But I've gone to many places and found that places that don't have internet have several mobile phones on one person. So mobile devices are a way to bring, or technology in general, a way to bring the world closer together. And if traditional knowledge is over here and is being lost when my grandparents pass on, and all the things I know from Barbados and Suriname, where my parents come from, when they die, they take that information with them. When we migrate to different countries, when we're forced off of our land because of soil erosion, that information needs to be captured and brought to other places so we can keep it going for our family and to represent our culture, because plants and culture are directly connected. So the recipes, the evidence-based focus, also the institutions that hold the knowledge tend to keep it to themselves, which I find defeats the purpose of helping communities and the public health aspect. If you call yourself public health, then we have to make sure the information gets to the public. So having a system where you can look up something like ginger, how to grow it, recipes of use, and then how different cultures in the world use it, and have a link that takes you directly to the evidence-based study that tells you the compounds on why that's beneficial, then that helps let younger generations know that this isn't just old wives' tales. This is actually valid information, and this is science that also helps justify it. It also helps prevent things like biopiracy. Biopiracy is when pharmaceuticals go into traditional communities and steal the knowledge from these indigenous communities. Biopiracy can be defeated when we can prove prior art. This technology will actually help record the previous use and existence of these plants attached to these cultures. So not only does this help with public health issues, this also helps facilitate community gardens in places where there's a lack of access to fresh fruits and vegetables. It also prevents the theft of knowledge and information from cultures who have been using it for hundreds and thousands of years. So the next slide, please. Sorry. So what I'm asking for and what I'm here for is I wanted to make sure that people knew that someone is working on your behalf. One of the last things that someone said on the panel before is to help. They want to help keep people where they are and help keep their knowledge alive and help keep the culture alive. This is exactly what I'm doing. This is what we're working on. So like I said, I've been doing this. I think my thesis was 2008, 2009. And I have been traveling and collecting and building, and I'm finally at the place where I have a version of the app on my phone. So I don't have time today to be able to show you on stage, but if anyone's interested, between now and 6 o'clock when I have my next class, I'm happy to show you what I have as a demonstration of what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to build. Thank you.
Thank you. I should say that the full bios of all the panelists are available online. Obviously, I'd rather spend the time letting them talk than just reading something that you can read online. Elisabeth, here, whoops-a-daisy. Go ahead and join. We're going to cover this up. And this was one of the small parts in the planning. I apologize to Andrew and to Elisabeth. We didn't think about their heads blocking the screen. And so, but we're bringing them back on, and they are next up. We're going to switch away from plants and from ethnobotany, and we're going to go right into language and take it over.
Okay, so yeah, so we're part of the Tunica Biloxi Language and Culture Revitalization Program. We work in that program with John, who you saw earlier today on the archaeology panel, as well as Donna, who you saw on the panel immediately preceding. It's a collaboration between, well, it's a department within the Tunica Biloxi tribe, and one of the things we do is we collaborate with a group of graduate students in Tulane University, which is how I became involved. I'm a PhD student here in the interdisciplinary program in linguistics. It's important to note, though, that it's not just a language program. It is definitely a language and culture program. One of the things that our department, as well as everybody who's involved in the program from the Tulane side of things, agrees on is that language is not separable from culture, and if there is no culture, the language doesn't matter, and vice versa. Not that the culture doesn't matter, but that they build on each other. So we do actually have, one of the things, we have many projects. The language is one of the, probably the bigger ones that we have, but there are also smaller ones. We have, one of the things we're working on is actually to try to get back what we can of the traditional ethnobotany of the Tunica Biloxi people and of Marksville itself. And we're going through old texts and finding what we can in terms of what plants we know were used because the people who were talked about using them, and we have words for them in the Tunica language, which is one of the heritage languages of the Tunica Biloxi tribe. I think our project is sort of unique in that many revitalization projects start with at least a small number of native speakers and build on that. We unfortunately don't have that luxury. The last known native speaker of the Tunica language, which is the language we're bringing back, died in 1948. He was interviewed at length by his name was Sesostri Yuchigon. He was you can talk more about Sesostri, I think that would be better.
Yes, Sesostri Yushikon, he was one of the chiefs of our tribe, and he worked with Mary Haas during the 30s before he passed in 1948. And he knew Tunica. He spoke Tunica with his mother before she passed in 1915. And during the 30s, he remembered quite a bit of the language, and Mary Haas was able to create a dictionary, grammar, and text of the language. And most of our work, most of our revitalization work is based off of Mary Haas's work, although we have standardized the language in order to teach it today to tribal youth and their families. We have many projects, many activities going on throughout the year. We have weekly language classes, and just this week we started up our online language classes, which we coordinate 2 times a year, once in the fall and once in the spring. I'm
Why
sorry,
don't
I'm not sure where to go
But
from
let
there.
the audience know a little bit about like the fact that you're collaborating with Tulane.
Yes, sure. In language revitalization, culture revitalization, preservation has always been a concern for our tribe. And in 2010, one of our council members approached Judy Maxwell here at Tulane University, and that's when much of the work with Tulane began, and students such as Patricia Anderson helped us to collect much of the primary sources that we have, from Mary Haas, Albert Gushy, and John Swanton. These things coming from American Philosophical Society and the Smithsonian, and also recordings at Indiana University and the California Language Archives. So we began parsing, these primary sources, and very much, identifying the rules of the grammar and standardizing from there. In 2012 is when my mother and I should say my family, began working with Tulane, and this was prior to the formation of LCRPR program, which was established in 2014. So, on a weekly basis, we meet with Tulane, the group here at Tulane University, and students like Andrew, who at one point joined the group, prior to joining our team. just this past fall, join our project and our efforts to revitalize the language and work on projects such as a Tunica language textbook and children's storybooks, and one of the biggest activities that we host each year, which is our summer camp for tribal youth.
Yeah, so one of the service learning programs that Dr. Kelly was talking about, one of the ones that is important to us on both ends of the equation, both on Tulane's end and the Tunica Biloxi's end, it's a summer course where it's a crash course. 1 week is a crash course in language revitalization and the Tunica language, where students actually learn to speak some of the language, as well as learn why it's important to revitalize this language. And then the next week is spent at our youth language and culture camp in Marksville, where the language is taught alongside culture around a yearly theme. So 2 years ago it was birds, last year it was sky, and this year it's plants and bugs. So we try to keep the kids entertained with things that are, tactile and fun, and they learn at the same time. And it's a very ambitious project. It's not without its frustrations, because it's a very difficult one, but it's one with great payoffs. And just the changes that I've seen since I started with the project 3 years ago has been very inspiring. And just to see sort of an aha moment where a child realizes not only like something about the language, but that this language is related to their heritage and their culture, and they take an active interest in it, and they realize that the language isn't, again, we were talking about how we don't like, you shouldn't view Native Americans as being, resigned to history or only in photographs. They realize that the language itself is not resigned to history. It's not a historical language that can only deal with things that existed 100 or 200 years ago. This is a language that is living, where we're making new words all the time based on existing words and based on strategies that we know were used to create words in Tunica. So we have a word for airplane, we have a word for computer, we have a word for other things that the kids want to talk about every day, but that may not have been very common in the time when Sesostri was speaking Tunica to his mother. So to have the children actually help in the creation of those new words and take ownership of the language is incredibly important and incredibly gratifying. And to have Tulane grads and undergrads, take a real interest in something that they knew nothing about. I'll be honest, when I came here for graduate school, I'm from New Orleans. I grew up here, and I had never heard of the Tunica Biloxi tribe, and they're a 3-hour drive away. And now I'm finding myself working with them, and it's sort of I think an embarrassment. I think that so few people realize that there are a lot of people think about Native America, and they think of California, and they think of Oklahoma, and they think of places like that, when in your backyard there's plenty of Native American history and Native American present and a Native American future.
Yes. All right, thank you. And we're going to end with Amy Lesson, and speaking about her work with Ildejan Charles, and that what she did with Chief Albert. Unfortunately, Chief Albert was unable to join us today, but if you could let people know the work that you did, that you've done with that tribe.
Sure, I have a slide that's not particular.
If you don't mind, just because I'm gonna have to ask them to move off the stage again.
So I know that I'm standing between you and wine, so I'm going to be brief. And I'll also say bienvenue à nos amis français. Mon français n'est pas assez bon d'expliquer mon travail, so I will speak in English, mais bienvenue. And so my name is Amy Lesson. I'm a faculty member here at Tulane in the Bywater Institute, where we do interdisciplinary research and engagement, most of which is about and around and in the coast of Louisiana and in our cities on the coast here in Louisiana as well. And I was supposed to be sitting here with Chief Albert Nakan of the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw Tribe, Ile de Jean Charles Band of the Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw Tribe. And a lot of you may have heard about the Ile de Jean Charles community and tribe, which is located in Terrebonne Parish and is on a slip of land that didn't used to be a slip of land and has, because of all of the reasons that I imagine you've talked about here today, that we're losing huge amounts of land on the coast minute by minute. The Ile de Jean Charles tribe's land has lost a huge amount of area and is very tiny now, and there's one road leading out into the island that is flooded even with a strong south wind. And so the tribe's land there has become a place that they do not feel is sustainable for them to live on a day-to-day basis any longer. And so for over 10 years, the tribe has been trying to work towards trying to figure out a way to move ahead and to try to reunite their entire community, because the entire Ile de Jean Charles community does not live any longer on the island. There's kind of what I often call a diaspora of people who are nearby, and it's about 300 people at this point. So Chief Albert has been working with other tribal members and with the tribe to try to move the community and figure out a way forward. And in 2016, the tribe worked with some other people, some people at the Lowlander Center, and which is a nonprofit in Terrebonne Parish that works with lowland people trying to solve environmental problems. And they wrote a grant proposal to HUD, and millions of dollars was awarded to the state of Louisiana. It's important to know that the money was not awarded directly to the tribe. There was money awarded to the state of Louisiana to facilitate the resettlement of the tribe. And so the tribe is currently, right now, in the very complicated process of working with the state to try to envision and actually move inland to an area about 50 miles away, I'd say. Would you say, Nathan, is that about right? So that's where we are right now, and I've known Chief Albert and Teresa, who was up here earlier, who's from Pointe-au-Chien, since about 2012, and the way that we got to know each other is that for a long time, my background, I'm kind of similar to Matt in that my background is in the natural and physical sciences, and at some point I realized that academics are very good at collecting information from other people and allowing it to help our own careers, but not necessarily doing anything with it that really furthers the livelihoods and wishes that people who are actually being affected by environmental problems. So I've been interested for a very long time in trying to change the dynamic of universities, taking information from people and using it to further the agenda of universities rather than actually helping people do what they need to do. And as we all know, people who are interested in environmental justice know that often environmental problems affect people who face a lot of oppression, institutional and cultural and historical oppression and racism and class oppression. And so for those of us who have a lot of letters after our names and are associated with these universities where we actually do hold a lot of power, it can be very important for us to collaborate with people and try to figure out ways that we can work with them to solve the problems that they actually want to solve. And so a couple of years ago, it was about a year ago, I was part of a group of people who are social scientists, natural scientists, architects, designers, and we applied with the tribe, with Chantel Comerdel, who's a tribal council member, and with Chief Albert for a National Academies of Sciences grant to try to work with the tribe while they're going through their resettlement to figure out ways that a diverse group of people like us with a lot of expertise can work with the tribe, who are also experts in ecology and environmental science, and they're experts in their own lives and own livelihoods, and what they actually have been trying to do for years is to try to figure out ways that we can all be working together to help the tribe do what the tribe wants to do. And what we're hoping is that this project, what we're essentially doing is we're doing two things. We're working with people who do community-based design to try to design some of the buildings that may end up in the tribe's new settlement. And the other thing that we're doing is essentially studying our own process, because a lot of what I end up doing in my work is trying to educate people like me around the best ways for academics to work with communities so that the community's agency is the most important thing in the project. So we're actually studying ourselves and hoping to write a lot about the process that academics and multiple experts use to work with community experts as well. And so it's an ongoing process. And I guess what I have to say is that my agenda around this is really to try to form a culture in academia of people with institutional power and certain kinds of knowledge to work with people throughout all sectors of society, because the environmental problems associated with climate and environmental change are so huge and so all-encompassing that it's going to take all of us working together. And if we don't work together and use our societal power as academics in ways that are ethical, I think that's really important. So that's what I do.
Thank you. I think the first step in, yes, thank you. They say that the first step in solving any problem is awareness, and I think from all the different panels, from geography to archaeology, and ending with this one today and hearing about different projects, we've become much more aware of the diversity of topics, the different approaches and collaboration, both in the past and the present and going forward. There's some really important questions about resiliency. There's different strategies and that different tribes have adapted. Relocation is one, staying in place, resiliency, how you keep the culture together, how the community remains cohesive. We've looked at that from a lot of different angles. And I ask you to think about that further and to please take advantage of talking to everybody who was up here on the stage today. And I would like to right now invite my co-chair, Rebecca Snedeker, back on the stage to say the closing remarks. Thank you.